The Battle of Kursk stands as the largest tank battle ever fought in history. The battle was fought by about 3 million men, 8,000 tanks, 13,000 armed vehicles, and nearly as much aircraft. This monumental clash took place on the Eastern Front. It began with a strong German attack, but ended with the Soviet Union having taken the initiative on the Eastern Front, something they kept for the rest of the war. As the frozen Russian landscape began to thaw in the spring of 1943, the Eastern Front was brought to a temporary standstill. Roads turned to mud and rivers became impassable torrents as the snow and ice melted. After fighting in the winter of 1942-43, the front line around the city of Kursk had stabilized into a large Soviet salient. This three-sided position was around 160 miles from north to south and extended up to 100 miles west into the German lines. It gave the Soviets a useful springboard to attack the Germans, but also offered the Germans an opportunity to close it with a pincer movement, trapping large Soviet forces. Both sides realized that the fighting to come this summer would be decisive in determining the outcome of the war in the East. Their defeat at Stalingrad in February 1943 and losses since meant that the Germans were increasingly short of men and equipment. In March 1943, forces on the Eastern Front were 470,000 below their established strength and had only around 600 operational tanks. They no longer had the strength to carry out a large-scale offensive and settled on the Kursk salient as a more limited, manageable battlefield. If they could pinch it closed, this would both destroy large Soviet forces and shorten the front line, improving their position. Agreed in mid-March, Operation Citadel, as the Kursk attack was known, was originally scheduled for mid-April. This was far too soon for the depleted German forces, and it was repeatedly delayed in order to allow for the arrival of supplies, reinforcements and new weapons such as the Panzer tank. The start date was eventually set for the 5th July. The Germans massed around 777,000 men, 2,451 tanks and assault guns, and 7,417 artillery pieces in 37 infantry and Panzer divisions, supported by our 1,800 aircraft. The northern attack was the responsibility of the 9th Army, part of Army Group Center, whereas in the south, the 4th Panzer Army and Army Detachment Camp, both of Army Group South, would lead the offensive. The aim was for these forces to link up around Kursk itself. Unfortunately for the Germans, their plan for the Kursk salient was known to the Soviets, both because of the military logic and because of intelligence gathered on the ground and from spies. As early as the end of March, the location of the attack was known. The Soviets considered a preemptive attack, but instead decided to defend. They would fortify the salient, defeat the German attacking forces, then launch their own counter-attack. The German delays gave the Soviets even more time to bring in reinforcements and to prepare successive defensive belts of minefields, anti-tank ditches, barbed wire, bunkers and other fortifications. They placed a heavy emphasis on anti-tank defense, creating strong points on likely avenues of attack and training the infantry to attack tanks at close range. Unlike the Germans, the Red Army was getting stronger and its morale was improving. More and superior equipment was coming into service, and although soldiers were still very inexperienced, the lessons of the first 2 years of war were being learned and acted upon. The Soviets packed forces into the salient. In the north, the Central Front of 711,000 men, 1,785 tanks and assault guns, and 12,453 artillery pieces was positioned behind almost 80,000 mines. The southern attack would be met by the Voronezh Front, consisting of 625,000 troops, 1,704 tanks, 9,751 guns and over 130,000 mines. Additional units in reserve meant that the Soviets had a total of more than 1.9 million men, 5,000 tanks, 31,000 guns and 3,500 aircraft to meet the German attack. By early July, the stage was set for the battle. On July 5, 1943, Operation Citadel commenced with a powerful German assault. The Luftwaffe initiated the attack with extensive bombing guns, aiming to weaken Soviet defenses. Following the aerial bombardment, German tanks and infantry launched their ground assault. The northern Panzer, led by General Walter Model's 9th Army, advanced from the Ural region, while the southern Panzer, commanded by Field Marshal Erich von Manstein's 4th Panzer Army and Army Detachment Camp, stuck from the Belgorod-Kharkov area. The Germans encountered fierce resistance from the outset. The Soviet defenses, meticulously prepared and densely fortified, blunted the initial German thrust. Minefields, anti-tank ditches and well-positioned artillery wreaked havoc on the advancing German attacks. Despite these obstacles, the Germans pressed on, their superior armor and tactical prowess allowing them to make some initial gains. The battle reached its critical juncture on July 12 at Prokhorovka, a small village south of Kursk. This confrontation is often cited as one of the largest tank battles in history. The 2nd SS Panzer Corps, spearheading the German southern attack, clashed with the Soviet 5th Guards Tank Army. The battle was ferocious, with tanks fighting at point-blank range, often in close quarters, creating chaos and carnage. Despite their initial progress, the Germans were unable to achieve a decisive breakthrough. The Soviet defense, bolstered by reserves and reinforcements, managed to contain the German advance. The relentless Soviet counter-attacks inflicted severe losses on the German armored divisions, effectively stalling their momentum. As the German offensive ground to a halt, the Soviets launched their planned counter-offensive. On July 12, simultaneous with the battle at Prokhorovka, the Red Army initiated Operation Kutuzov in the north, targeting the German-held Ural salient. This operation aimed to encircle and destroy the German 9th Army, forcing a retreat. In the south, the Soviets launched Operation Polkovodets-Rumyantsev, aiming to liberate Belgorod and Kharkov. The relentless Soviet pressure proved overwhelming for the depleted German forces. By August 23, the Soviets had recaptured key territories, including Kharkov, marking the end of the Battle of Kursk.